Okay, so I'm going to get rolling with the class. Thanks for all of y'all for joining. I really appreciate y'all hopping on, and I hope that a majority of this class is useful. I know that everybody here will get something out of it. This is a class that I've modified from what I teach in the military regarding navigation and reading terrain so that it is more applicable to the alpine environment and y'all. So as we go through, if you have questions, go ahead and post them in the chat and I'll get to them as we go. And I look forward to teaching you all this material. It's one of my favorite things to teach. So you should now have up on your screen, I've shared the screen, the slide deck. That's where we're going to start before we move into working off some of the maps that I shared with y'all. If you don't have the maps, then we'll get the link tree into the chat here so you can reference those maps once we get to it on your computer. Okay, so this class, I called it Tactical Alpinism. The real purpose is to first teach y'all the basics of military planning as it applies to routes and route planning in the Alpine. And the second part is to discuss a little bit of the technical portion of navigation around identifying grids and using the compass. I'm not going to dive too deeply into the use of the compass because it's really hard to teach over Zoom. So what I have done is at the link tree, once Bethan posts it, that link has a user manual for the two most common types of compass, so that if you want to get more detailed on the parts and use of those compasses, then you can. I will cover a little bit, but not too much on the compass just because it's such a hard thing to teach in this environment. Okay, so in planning, there's a few quotes here. So no plan survives first contact with the enemy. And really in our case with the Alpine, the enemy is reality and or the conditions. So just know that a plan is not exactly what is going to happen, but it's a place to shift from. And when conditions change, when things get harder, you've made those decisions before you get out into that environment where the stress is higher, so that you can make a more accurate and more deliberate decision as stress increases, because you've already done the decision making before. Next one is a Dwight D. Eisenhower quote. In preparing for battle, I've always found the plans are useless, but planning is indispensable. So the plan itself, the purpose of creating a plan is to make you more familiar with what you're going to do. I've often found that after I plan a route for a region, I never pull out my map while I'm on that tour or that Alpine objective. So the planning itself seats the operation that you're doing or the route or the objective you're doing more firmly in your mind, so that you can save time once you actually get out on the ground and are moving in your time limited weekends or however you're choosing to recreate. So my background, I'm active duty military currently and have spent 14 years doing military things and navigating the military. 10 of those have been as an infantry officer, which means that my job is to walk around in the woods with a lot of weight and do a lot of navigation. So this is something that I do fairly often and have taught at all levels, from individual up to the company level, where I've had 140 people and are moving and coordinating them to all get onto one objective at one time. Had a combat deployment to Afghanistan. I've done some pretty neat things working with mountain warfare for the 10th Mountain Division. Got assigned to take my whole company down to the Andes, and none of them had skied or done anything in the Alpine before that. So I got the opportunity to teach and train a whole company and develop the training progression to get them from zero to skiing in time to go down to the Andes for a mountain warfare exercise. Currently, I'm an assistant professor of military science. So this class I'm teaching, I teach every semester to students. It's the one you will see today is a lot more specific to the alpine environment. Finally, civilian side, I'm a skier, I'm a climber, and I'm working on my IFMGA certifications currently. So the ultimate purpose of this class is to build your safety, speed, and competence in the mountains and confidence. And you can see a few of the ways below that we'll be getting after that. So the agenda, we're going to hit a case study right up front of a tour I did on Mount Dana. Then we'll go into some military planning basics, including some terrain and weather analysis. Then we'll talk some of the navigation tools and the technical portion of map reading. Then we'll go into an example on Denali where I take you through a few different route plans for Denali itself. And then we'll go into a practical exercise and where we'll go into breakout rooms and y'all will plan a route to close out this class. Okay, so on Mount Dana, last January, I was intended to go up there and do a route called Coke Shoot, ski that route with a friend of mine. For this day, we had built this route plan that you see on the screen before we ever left home. So the red route is the primary route that we planned and the ideal route that we wanted to take because it took us right up the actual ski line, which is between CP5 and the drop-in. Alternate route is the purple line, which took us around. And that would depend on a few factors that I'll talk a little bit later when we get into terrain analysis. And then the yellow line is a route that I'll talk about here momentarily. So we started off from checkpoint 1 where you can see my mouse now. And if you can't see the mouse, it should be a blue dot on your screen. Then we moved along to checkpoint 2, continued up through this red and yellow terrain. So that red and yellow terrain is indicating your slope angle. If you're not familiar with Caltopo, and the angles are down below at the flat base of the screen. Moved up to checkpoint 3. Once we hit checkpoint 4, you see the star. That was our decision point. At that decision point, we knew that we were going to have a good visual of the objective area, the shoot that we were aiming to ski. Top left picture, you can see what we could see from that position. Far left of that picture, the top left of the screen, you can just barely see the ridge that the purple line starts going up, and then it would actually goes to the left of the cliff.
Sorry to interrupt you, but your audio just got really rough to hear.
Thank you for letting me know.
How's this? Is this better?
Yeah, that's way better.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so backing up. So we take our route and hit checkpoint 4. At checkpoint 4, we had a decision to make right where that purple star is, a decision point. So from there, we could see the objective that we were going towards, which is up on the top left screen where that red dot is here. That's what we were aiming to ski that day. Just off the left of the screen here, you can see the beginning of the alternate route. You can't see it as it comes around the cliff to the far left. So we had decided that was going to be our point where we would make our decision because we could see the route. As you can see, the sun's just barely hitting the top of the terrain up in here to the right of the actual objective itself. Then on the left, we have no snow on the left side, no snow and ice, and that's a fully northwest facing section of terrain. And then all this snow that you see in that chute itself was wind-blown hard pack, essentially like chalkboard snow. So we decided that we were going to head straight up the couloir itself because the overhead hazard was fairly low and the avalanche conditions were very favorable for us. The one thing that was an unknown for us until we got eyes on that chute is looking at this bottom left picture, you can see some frost crystals. So during the approach from checkpoint 1 to checkpoint 3, there's between 4 and 8 inches of that refrozen powder that you see here in that bottom left picture. So that was the main thing we wanted to know is how much of that had been blown around, how high were the avalanche conditions going to be up in that chute, because there were no recent reports from that area. So what we ended up doing is getting eyes on this objective and making our decision from there. But we had our decision point already outlined prior to our planning. Now we get up to where that red dot is. My partner gets a little scared. We decide to turn around because it's not worth it for him to be uncomfortable, as the hardboard was barely edgeable on skis, and he wasn't confident that he was going to be able to ski it fully from the top as the angle kicked up. So we put on skis about where that red dot is here in the top of the couloir and skied our way down. Looking back to the map, one of the cruxes of the descent was getting back to that saddle where we had made the decision that we did. The terrain naturally dumps you to the north, to the left here, and into this other terrain feature, which would make a bit bigger descent for us. And there's some rocky terrain through here that doesn't fill in all that well. So we knew one of our cruxes from our route planning was getting back to this saddle so we could have the most direct route possible. Because we'd planned the route, we knew exactly where we needed to get to and managed to make it there without a problem. We continued to ski down generally on route until we got just past checkpoint 2. And at that point, I got lazy and didn't want to put skins back on to move back to checkpoint 1. Following this yellow line, though, meant that we could continue going slightly downhill and not have to put skins on. What ended up happening at that point, we were at about 5 hours into the day. At this point, we cross the first river channel and find out that this whole zone here where the zigzags are showing up is a braided river channel. So we went off of our route plan where we knew it worked because we got lazy, didn't want to put skins on, and ended up crossing 5 more rivers that were fairly significant through that day. And it took us 3 additional hours to cover these final few hundred meters to get back to the road because we decided to violate our route plan. So we could have had a much shorter day and a much easier day and less frustrating day by actually getting on and sticking to our route plan and not getting lazy like we did there. Okay, so I talked a few considerations, and now I'll go into how I made those decisions that I did in the planning. So for the route plan, here's a tool that I use to build my route plans so that I know the time and have a resource to refer to while I'm moving. Across the top, you have DDTMK. So you have your distance, direction, time, type of movement that you've planned, and then the key event or feature. That way, if for the key event, for example, if you're going to cross 2 rivers or 2 bits of low ground, you can put that there so you can clue yourself in. Another way to use this is to include elevation so that if you know you should cross a saddle at 12,000 feet and you haven't crossed a saddle and you're over 12,000 feet, now you know you might be off route. So again, this is another planning tool that we utilize, and it's one that I'm going to recommend you all use when we go into the practical exercise. Okay, so the base of planning for the military is the operations order. It has 5 paragraphs, but we're going to focus in on 2 of the paragraphs, paragraph 1 and 3. The situation is understanding the problem, and we'll talk about terrain and weather primarily in that. Then you get your mission. For us, we all know what our mission is. It's the objective that we're aiming to go climb, ski, or go up in some form or fashion. It's the objective or the mission of the day. Then in the execution, we're going to dive into specific route planning and really talk in detail how we get to the routes that we use. So for the weather, I always look at weather in 2 ways. First, I look at historics for what was happening. I also look at historic avalanche conditions. So if you're in Colorado or in the Sierra Nevada of the United States, they have excellent avalanche forecasting services that you can refer to. They'll provide a lot of those historics for you. One thing I will say that I didn't caveat up front, this is not an ARI class, so I'm not going to cover a lot of the avalanche considerations. I'll brush on it as we talk planning, but this is not a replacement for an area class by any means, or another a professional avalanche class. So for your weather, I'm going to look at these 5 features that you see on the left. The acronym I use, or the breakdown I use for that, is VW Captain to help me remember, and that's visibility, wind, cloud cover, precipitation, and temperature. So you're going to look at that in 2 ways. One is historic, and 2, what it's going to be doing the day when you're out there. Then finally, you're going to have to confirm it when you get on the ground. Now, the important one for us with route planning is going to be section B here, the terrain. So the acronym you use for this is AOKO. So for those of you that are in the military, you may notice that this is a change to what the military uses it. I've adapted it to be more specific to what we use in the outdoors for some of these alpine environments. But that'll be obstacles, natural and man-made. An example of a man-made obstacle is on that Mount Dana route. I could have driven up higher and started from about 2,000 feet higher. So I only had 2,500 feet of elevation gain instead of 4,500 feet of elevation gain. But that road closes in the winter. So I had a man-made obstacle of a gate that prevented me from going up higher and making it a shorter day. Then you have your avenues of approach. Those will be the primary corridors that you can maneuver or move through for your objective. Then you'll have your key hazards. This can be things from avalanches to rockfall, and any other hazards that are known for that route. You really get to a lot of those key hazards by doing some historical research on the route and seeing what other people have identified, in addition to doing your own assessment based on some slope angles and other considerations. Finally, with those key hazards, you want to identify ways to mitigate those hazards. So you want to identify if there are islands of safety you can go to, safe areas to make decisions from, and adjust accordingly. Line 4 is aspect. So is the objective north or south facing? And then where on your route are you at highest risk due to, say, warming, because you're south facing and the sun is warming the snow, and you want to be off that part of the terrain before it gets too warm. Finally, observation. This is going to be key observation points where you can get eyes on your route so you can make a decision before you're actually in the gut. So for the example given from Mount Dana, you'll notice that we had an observation point a few hundred ways out, about a kilometer out from the objective. And then we had some additional observation points in there for the route we took, the primary route. We had our observation as we're going up the couloir. And for skiing, oftentimes that's a great way to do it, where you're actually climbing the thing you're going to ski, so you know what the snow conditions are. However, if there's overhead hazard, such as rockfall, cornices, or potential avalanche conditions that are unknown, then you can go around and plan to get eyes on from top down. But always plan some way to get eyes on that objective if at all possible. Finally, we have our enemy is the third part of the situation. So in this case, our enemy is really reality, which is going to be your objective hazards, the hazards you can't control. So few of those hazards that you can't control are going to be avalanche conditions, snow loading, and rockfall. And those are going to be dependent on temperature, aspect, so the direction your route is facing, and then also recent historic conditions with snow. And then just the note down at the bottom, so prime avalanche terrain, that's going to be slopes greater than 30 degrees and less than 50 degrees. The reason it's less than 50 degrees is because typically, not always, but typically, the snow will fall off or not stick unless it's super wet snow to that steep a terrain. But you have to pay attention to the slopes above you throughout. So actually planning the route. So when you saw the example route from the Mount Dana example, I had a few points in there. I had some checkpoints and I had some decision points. So here's a few things that you can include in your route, not all of them will be required for each route that you plan. First off, you need to know where you're starting, where your car is going to be parked, or where you're getting off the gondola, or however you're starting that route. Then along the route, you identify checkpoints. The reason we identify checkpoints is we have a point that we can now name after we've started moving. So if you and your partner know that checkpoint 1 is at a specific location, it shortens communication. Instead of having to say, like, next to that tree back there, like an hour ago, you can just say checkpoint 1, and now it's an understood location. The second reason is because in the cold, our navigation systems are often going to drain their battery a lot faster. So a very good technique to use is to only turn on your navigation systems when you need them. Now, what that's going to prevent is a breadcrumb trail from being developed as you go. But because you've had these checkpoints in, you can now navigate from checkpoint to checkpoint as needed using your GPS system. Finally, you have decision points. So decision points are pre-planned spots where you're going to make a decision. In the case of the Mountanos, are we going to take the alternate route or the primary route? We knew which one we wanted to take and what our decision point or what our reason would be for not taking either of the two routes. The decisive point, the purple star, that's the point you know you're going to quote unquote win the day or achieve the objective. It's not like 100% guaranteed, but it's very likely. So for most of us, when we talk rock climbing or alpine climbing, that's going to be making it through the crux. And once you've made it through the crux, as long as conditions don't change, you're fairly darn likely to make it to the top of the route and then be able to get down safely. In other cases, maybe it is getting to the top if the descent is the crux, right? You might have to get down through a certain portion of the descent where there's a traverse or some other crux in the descent. And that could be your decisive point where you know you're now very likely to be successful. So for us on our Mount Dana day, our decision point was where our decisive point was, because we knew if we could see that terrain feature and make a good decision, we'd be fine to ski it. Next, you have your point of no return. Some routes, especially if they're very traversing in nature, will have a point of no return where it's safer to continue up, or in the case of skiing, continue down than it is to bail. This isn't always the case, but there are going to be some routes that have that, and it's something definitely that you want to know. Then the final piece here, and I'd argue the most important one, is your turnaround criteria. So this is so that you can make an impassionate decision when you're out there. When are you going to turn around? Is it a time? Is it conditions? Is it fear or fatigue in the group? Or is it a combination of those? So turnaround criteria that you make and then stick to are a great way to save lives. So now we've talked to some of the route planning considerations, and we'll go into some of the more specific navigation stuff. Okay, so with your navigation, you have two primary techniques that a lot of people are used. First, you have terrain association, which that's where you compare your map to the surrounding terrain. This technique is what's most commonly used in the alpine because it's very easy to see terrain features. As long as you have a good understanding of what a topo map looks like and can translate that into a 3D image, then you're going to be set and ready to go. And it's almost always faster. The only time it's not going to be faster and more efficient than dead reckoning is when you get into a restricted visibility situation. So your restricted visibility could be in the tree line, could be if fog or clouds roll in. These are going to be the times where having a dead reckoning plan is going to save your bacon. Dead reckoning is where you calculate your current position using speed of travel, a previously known point, and then direction over a set amount of time. So it's more accurate in restricted terrain, but it takes a lot more planning and practice to become proficient at. So if you want to really get good at navigation, once we finish this class today, I highly recommend you going out to do some dead reckoning yourself, and we'll talk what that looks like. So the tools of the trade. So you have two common different types of compass. On the left, you have a Sunto compass, which is a base plate compass. On the top right, you have a lensatic compass. So your Sunto compass is a great tool for using in a recreational setting. The clear backing and the scales on it are really useful. You have a slope angle indicator, which is that black arrow that you can see on the screen. That'll allow you to identify slope angles when you're out navigating. And then you also have your direction angle and some on the bezel ring, this ring that rotates on it. You have a glow in the dark portion that, as long as you charge it with a light, works really well. This is my preferred compass because it's a little bit faster than the lensatic compass. The thing I like the best about this compass is that you can adjust for the declination angle, which we'll talk about here momentarily. So you don't have to do the most annoying part of navigation, which is adjusting your angle for the magnetic north. Next, you have your lensatic compass. The two main benefits of this compass are, one, it's way more durable. I'm not going to say you can't break them, but they're a lot harder to break. Because if I say you can't break them, I know somebody here will, but they're a lot harder to break, especially when you use this lever here. This lever locks the wheel of the compass in place. So as you're moving, it doesn't get jostled around, which increases the longevity of the compass. Additionally, on these lensatic compasses that are official military compasses, they have on the north-seeking arrow and then on the bezel ring here, you have yellow marks. Those yellow marks are actually powered by a radioactive material called tritium. It's not dangerously radioactive. It's very small in the amount, but it makes it so that those points glow in the dark without you needing to charge them using a headlamp. So that way you can keep your night vision. So that's one of the key things that's really useful about this is the durability and then the night navigation use. So if you're doing a lot of night navigation, that's where I'd recommend using and having a lensatic compass. If you're doing a lot of like mountain navigation, but primarily during the day, and you want to be a little bit faster, that's where the Sunto compass is really useful. Finally, at the bottom right, you have your protractor. For most of y'all, I don't recommend getting one. They're fairly flimsy, and it's just an additional thing to lose because it's hard to tie down. They are really good for plotting points. They can be a little bit more accurate, but both of the compasses that I showed, as you can see on the screen, they have a scale on them and an ability to measure things. So you can use that to get to be precise with measuring distance or measuring your grid coordinates. Okay, so I talked about magnetic declination a little bit before. Now, one of the things that might blow some minds is that north is not north. There are three different types of north. So if you look at the baselines, you have your true north, which is what is actually north on the globe. You have grid north, which is your north on the map, which is what the grid lines on a map follow. Now, if you look at the example on the screen, grid north is 1.6 degrees off of true north. Anything less than 3 degrees in terms of human navigation with a map and a compass is negligible because we just aren't that accurate. Okay, so 1.6 for the grid north and true north, you can consider grid north true north for the navigation you're going to be doing. Now, magnetic north is where we get thrown off because if you look at the bottom left image, you can see that our magnetic north changes. On the east coast of the United States, we're at 15 degrees to the west. And then on the west coast of the United States, we're at 15 to 20 degrees to the east. The image on the right shows what the magnetic fields look like across the globe. The only point where magnetic north is actually north is where you see those green lines on that bottom right image. The unit of measure we're going to use for measuring magnetic and grid north is always going to be degrees. There are two others, mils and gradients. We don't need to be that precise. Now we're going to talk azimuths. So anytime we take a reading on a compass or plan a route heading, that's going to be in an azimuth. The degree, the direction we choose, that's the azimuth that we are going to be walking or traveling along. So the azimuth is your direction of travel. Your back azimuth is if you add or subtract 180 degrees from the azimuth you're traveling on, that'll take you exactly in the opposite direction because your compass has 360 degrees that it rotates through. So if you're over 180, then you're going to subtract 180. And if you're under 180 for your azimuth, you're going to add 180. Now, why is that important? If you think back to that route plan I showed you, I only planned my route plan going from my start point to my drop-in point for that skiing objective. Because I knew that if I took the back azimuth of each of those angles, now I'd have my reverse route plan without having to make a list that's twice as long. Now, for the Sunto compass, the great thing about these is you notice that there is a magnetic azimuth on the screen of 14.7. On the back of this compass, there's a little screw that you can actually adjust before you go so that you've already accounted for that and you don't need to do any math. For your lensatic compass, you are going to need to do some math to make that adjustment. Now, so what I want you all to do, if you have your Mount Dana map printed out, go ahead and pull that out for me and take a look at the bottom of that Mount Dana map. So we're going to talk some of the marginal information on this map moving from left to right. If you have it digitally, go ahead and pull that up for me as well so you can look at the map as I talk through it. Starting on the bottom left of the map, you have your the title of Dana example map. That's the name of the map. Then second line, you have WGS 84. So that's your datum. The datum's important for y'all because it's going to allow you to set your GPS so it's accurate to the map you are using. There's some other datums that you will see for maps. And if you have the wrong datum set in your GPS, it will not be as accurate or accurate at all, depending on the region of the globe to that map. So it can throw you off quite significantly. So you always want to make sure that your GPS is set to the correct datum. And if you and a partner are using different maps for whatever reason, make sure that you're using a map in the same datum or you select one of those maps that you're going to use so you're talking the same language when it comes to the maps you're using. Moving down to the UTM zone. So these UTM zones, they're 100 kilometer by 100 kilometer zones. They're really large, right? So in this case, the one that Mount Dana's in is 11 Sierra. That's our 100 by 100 K zone. Now, as we zoom in and get closer, we're going to see on the Mount Dana map that you have on the left side, you have a 41 and 42 on those grid coordinates that you see on the left as the first two digits. That's zooming you in a little bit tighter. So in UTM, we talk about grid zones in two different ways, which makes it super easy to do, right? So you're going to the 41 and 42 on the left side. That's a linear grid zone, and then as you look at the bottom, at the 0.3s, that's another linear grid zone. As you move east to west, that's an easterly grid zone, and as you move north to south, that is a northerly or a northing grid zone. Those two grid zones combined, the 0.3 combined with the 4.1, that gets us to our UTM zone of 11 Sierra. So if you want to, you could always go nerd out and look at what the different zones are across the globe. You don't need to do that unless you really want to, but just know that that's how these maps adjoin each other as we get bigger and bigger and bigger. Now moving over to the center, you have your scale. So every single UTM, or for the military folks, MGRS, military grid reference system, map that you use the grids on the map are going to be 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer. They're 1 kilometer square. That's always going to be the case, unless you zoom in super far and it becomes 100 meters square, or you zoom out really far and it becomes a 10 or 100 kilometer square. So the way you identify what your scale is by going down to the very bottom, and on the Mount Dana map, it says a scale of 1 by 25,000. Okay, so you have a scale, and I now pulled it up on the screen, so y'all should be able to see it as I'm sharing too. So you have a scale of 1 by 25,000. If you look at some of the other maps, such as the Mount Shasta or the Denali map, those scales are 1 by 50,000. So there are two reasons that you would choose one map scale over the other. If you're covering a longer distance or the objective area is bigger, then you're going to probably want to go with a 1 by 50,000 map, because that allows you to cover double the distance on that image, unless you want to carry multiple map sheets if you're printing them out on this 8.5 by 11 format that I've printed or that I shared with y'all. If you are not covering as big of an area, or you have more complex terrain where you want more detail, then that's where you'd print out in the 1 by 25,000 scale, because it makes each of the terrain features larger and more obvious. Finally, moving over to the far right, notice that on the Mount Dana map, we have a 12.6 as our magnetic north, as compared to the 14 that we had on our previous map example. Now, for those of y'all that have a compass available and have a paper map printed, go ahead and place that compass over your map. For those of you that don't have a paper map printed or are working on a desktop computer or a steel table, know that your compasses are going to be impacted by anything that has a magnetic signature. So if you put, say, two compasses together, that's going to adjust where your north points. Also, if you have high power lines, those are, if you're within 10 meters of power lines, that's going to impact your azimuth and make it less accurate or completely inaccurate. And then if you have like a steel item, such as the heads of an ice axe or a rifle, those are also going to negatively impact your azimuth. So you have to make sure any steel or metal item that does have a magnetic signature is at least 1 meter away. And then any electronic item that is high power, like a power line, is 10 meters away from your compass. So since we're all working with phones and computers, your azimuth today could be impacted by the digital items you're using. What we're going to do is we're going to take our compass and we're going to place it over top of the map and see where that north arrow is pointing. What I want you to do is, looking at your magnetic azimuth in the bottom right side of the map, I want you to line up your compass with that magnetic azimuth. For those of you who don't have a Sunto compass and or have not adjusted it, what should now be happening is that your compass is reading very close to the same azimuth as the magnetic north azimuth. So for my compass, and what you'll have to do to get that to work is you'll have to take your map, and as you line it up with the compass, say, as you look at my image here, as you look at my image, say north is not north on the map. I'll have to rotate my map until those norths line up. Then I'm going to take my compass down to the bottom of the map here and rotate the map until that magnetic north lines up with magnetic north on the compass. What this does is it now makes it so that your map, as you are referencing it, is pointing in the direction you expect it to be pointing, so that as you now look at it and look at the terrain, the map is oriented the same way as the terrain. This is called orienting your map, and is the best way to make sure you're looking at what you expect to be looking at while you're in terrain. Give me one moment. I'm moving back to sharing the screen. Okay, so we talked magnetic north, and we talked the marginal data on the map. The final piece that I want to talk on the map are those blue numbers that you see on the left or on all the sides of your map. Those are your grids. As I said before, each of these grids on your screen is a 100 kilometer, or excuse me, a 1 kilometer grid based on the scale that you have. Now, the numbers that you want to pay attention to when we're reading grids are going to be the two big numbers. So those small numbers, the 4 1s, the 0 3s that you see on your map, those smaller numbers that are to the left of the big number are what you want to ignore as we're reading grid coordinates. Okay, the final piece before we go dive into grid coordinates a little bit further is going to be your contour lines. So you have 3 different types of contour lines. Typically, only 2 of them are going to show up on a map. So you have your index contour lines, which are the ones that show up with a elevation associated with them. Those are going to be thicker brown lines. Then you also have your intermediate contour lines. These are the ones that are not going to have a number associated with them, but if you purchase an official map, then it will annotate the contour line interval. Notice that the Mount Dana map that I have produced for you does not have a contour line interval. So you'll have, with this type of map, you would have to look at the distance between your index lines and do a little bit of math to figure out what that contour interval is. Bumping up to the typical colors, just know that colors between maps are going to change. So you need to be able to look at the marginal information or know what the colors on your maps mean. The 2 that are always going to be constant are going to be water and vegetation. Water is always going to be blue and vegetation is always going to be green. Okay. All the other colors are fairly changeable. USGS maps are going to follow the colors that you see and on the screen currently, and so are Forest Service maps, but other maps that you may produce or find are not going to necessarily follow all those colors. So now we're hitting a little bit of reading of terrain features. So these terrain features, you have 5 major terrain features. 4 of those are displayed on the screen currently. So you have a ridge and a ridge line. A ridge line is multiple connected hill points. They're connected by high ground. So as you can see on the screen here, we have several hilltops that are connected. That's a ridge line. Those are indicated by your contour lines. Now, if you look at the south side of this ridge line versus the north side, you can tell that the north side is steeper. That's because the contour lines are closer together. The closer your contour lines are, the steeper the terrain is. Here on the top left, you have a ridge. Your ridge is going to be an extended piece of high ground that is going to be elevated and generally consistent for a longer period of time. On the top right, you have a hill. Hills are always going to be a closed circle at the highest point. A saddle in the bottom right is a point between 2 hilltops. So often we'll use saddles as a point to travel through when we're navigating so that you don't have to gain as much and lose as much elevation as you travel. Your other 2 major terrain features are valleys, shown here on the left. A valley is a major terrain feature that will have significant steepness on either side of it and will often have some sort of water running through it or some sort of glacier or significant snow in a winter environment. The final one that you're not going to see that often is going to be your depressions here on the top right. depressions will have hash lines. You'll see hash lines and two other features that are coming up. Those hash lines always point to the low ground. There are three minor terrain features. Two of them are the draw and the spur. A draw is lower ground on the side of a hill, and a spur is high ground on the side of a hill. The way I remember draws versus spurs and most of these terrain features is I make a fist. So as you look at your fist, you have a hilltop on the knuckle. You have a ridge line coming across your knuckles. Ridge line coming across your knuckles. You have a spur that comes down the finger, and then you have a draw that comes between the fingers. Now, a valley and a draw are both low ground, but the difference between a valley and a draw is a valley is going to be a lot more significant. So in this example, you'd actually take two fists and put them together, and that space between your two fists, that's your valley. Okay, so valley is a much more significant low ground than a draw is. Draws and spurs are very useful for navigation because you will often pick one or the other to be what you navigate up. Okay, moving into our final three terrain features, the easiest one typically to identify is going to be your cliff. Cliffs are indicated where your contour lines are very close together. Then you have your final two terrain features, which are a cut and a fill. Again, this is where you have the hash lines show up. The hash lines are always going to point downhill. Cuts and fills are both man-made features always. So we've talked some terrain features now, and we're at 50 minutes in currently. So we're going to talk grid coordinates before we shift over to doing the example practical exercise and then your practical exercise where you build a route. So for determining grid coordinates are always going to be read left to right on the map and then bottom to top. So as you look at a map, when you read it, you're going to first be given, or these grid coordinates are always going to be in multiples of 2. If you have a 5-digit or 7-digit grid coordinate, you know that it is an inaccurate grid coordinate. When I'm saying these numbers, I mean these two numbers here. Correction, these 4 numbers. Okay. So in the example shown on the screen, as we read from left to right, we come to the 0-3 line, and then we'll move up to the 8-0 line. This indicates the bottom left corner of this 1 kilometer grid square indicated. So a 4-digit grid is accurate to 1 kilometer. Now, as you increase the number of digits, this is how you would do it, looking at the top right image. So you'd have 0-3-0, meaning that we stay on this 0-3 line. And then for your 8-0, because it's 8-0-6, we're going to move up to the 6. Now, the way you measure these numbers is you are going to use either the scale on your compass, the scale on your protractor, or the scale from your map to measure where those numbers are. The key thing that people mess up when they're looking at grid coordinates is they flip the two numbers and they start going from bottom to top instead of left to right. You always read a grid from left to right and then bottom to top. The way I do this is between the 0-3-0 here on the 6-digit grid and the 8-0-6, I will put a significant space or even a slash line through it so that I know to keep those separate and not mix up the grids. Finally, to get more accurate, here at the bottom right, you can increase that to an 8-digit grid. So you have 0-3-0-5, which means that we've now moved just to the right of the 0-3 line. And we move up to 8-0-6-0, which means we stay right where the 6 is here on the bottom right image. So I'm going to pull up the Mount Dana map. I'll do a quick look at the grids on the Mount Dana. So for each of y'all, what I'd like you to do is taking the scale that you have on your map or the scale you have on your compass, I'd like you to find the grid coordinate for checkpoint 5. And I'll post the correct answer in the chat. Remember, as you do this on these maps, you're starting using the larger digits, not the first 2 small digits. Those first 2 small digits are not necessary on this map. And to Alex Cummings, I just saw your note regarding draws. In the UK, I guess they're called re-entrants. We do not use that name in the US. So if y'all are in the UK, and hopefully I said that right, Alex, that's another name for draws. Okay, so for the grid coordinate for checkpoint 5, the correct answer is 06429890. So if you did get 9890, then 064, what that means is that you read from bottom to top. So make sure that you're putting them in the right order. Otherwise, you can end up really far off. And if you didn't get the practical exercise, then this is something that takes time. And one of the things I will do following the class is I'll post some specific YouTube videos for finding grid coordinates and determining azimuths on your map in the Google Drive that I shared with y'all. Okay, in the final few minutes we have before we go into the practical exercise, there are 2 planning factors that you can use for determining time. The first is the military planning factor that you find in military technical manuals. Where this one is useful is when you're moving with a larger group of people or when you're carrying quite a bit of weight, because it's accurate to those types of conditions. It's more simple than the next one I'm going to annotate, and really needs to be adapted for your level of fitness or the group's level of fitness in order to be most accurate. So for the example here, the military planning factor is 2 to 3 kilometers per hour. Then you add 1 hour for every 1,000 feet of elevation gain and add 1 hour for every 2,000 feet of elevation loss. For the example, we walk 1,000 feet and have 1,000 feet of elevation gain over 4 kilometers. So what that means is 1,000 feet of gain is 1 hour. And then 4 kilometers of movement is 2 hours. So 1 plus 2 is 3 total hours of movement. Again, this is a military planning factor. So it's taking account for being cross country with a fairly heavy pack on and a moderate to low level of fitness for the people moving. The second one that is common for guides to use as they are planning their routes is the Munter unit. So this one is a little bit more complicated, but as you understand it, becomes fairly accurate. The only thing that's going to significantly change this accuracy is your and your group's level of fitness. So for Munter units, 1 kilometer is 1 unit, 100 meters of gain is 1 unit, and 100 meters of loss is 1 unit. For your modifiers, you have the different ones annotated here on the screen. Those modifiers, you're going to divide from the Munter units. So in the example at the bottom, if you are walking 1,000 feet of elevation gain over 4 kilometers, same numbers as before, 1,000 feet is 304 meters of gain because you have to convert it to meters, which is 3 Munter units for 300 meters of gain. Then you have 4 kilometers, which is 4 Munter units. So you have in the solution, you have 3 plus 4, and you divide that by your modifier for walking uphill, which is also 4, which gives you 1.75 hours for your estimated movement time. For y'all, if you are doing a movement plan where it's more of a day plan, you don't have a significantly heavy pack, then this is going to be the one that you want to use. For when you have a heavier pack that's 40 pounds or more, then the military planning factor is typically a more accurate one to use because that's going to slow you down significantly. Again, the biggest impact on this is going to be fitness. So you need to adjust for your level of fitness as you do these plans. And the only way you can do that is by getting out and actually spending time on your feet, tracking the elevation gain and distance. Okay, so that ends the class portion of this. What I am going to do now is I'm going to pull up the Denali map and talk through using CalTopo and then 2 different examples, 3 different example routes for Denali. And for this, I am going to use the planning process. So if you pull up some of that planning process that I talked about, I'll be going through the terrain considerations as we go. Okay, so up on the screen now, I have CalTopo, which for those of you that have never used CalTopo, on the left of the screen, you're going to have your features that you add to the map. I have all of those turned off right now. Then on the right, you have your map layers. I always use in CalTopo the map builder layers because it gives you a really nice 3D map that when you print it out makes it a lot easier to read terrain than your normal Forest Service or other government produced topographic maps. If you want to overlay a satellite map, then you have your map overlays here on the right to the bottom of the base layers. So you can add in contour lines. You can add in that map builder overlay, which I don't need because I'm in a map builder map, which is a CalTopo specific map. And then the most useful one for us is going to be our slope angle shading. So notice that I've added slope angle shading to this map now, and all the terrain that is either orange, red, or purple is going to be your prime avalanche zones. Okay. So you need to know what the slopes are you're walking on or traveling on. Then you also need to consider what's above you, because if a slide starts well above you and you have avalanche terrain above you, it could take you out as well. So for the specific case study that we're going to talk the Cassine Ridge. So for the Cassine Ridge itself, where that red dot is on the screen now, that is the typical start of the Cassine Ridge. So we're going to plan to get to that start point for the technical portion of this route. Okay, so we have our SP for the Cassine Ridge up. The advanced base camp for Denali is where the second red marker is. And so that's where most people are going to move to once they've gotten off the air taxis. So now there are three routes that are typically used to get to the base of the Cassine Ridge. And I'm going to talk through the considerations of why those are used. The first one that you can see already marked on the map is your Cassine Ridge route. So that dotted line goes through the North Fork of the Hilton Glacier, and it's also known as the Valley of Death. The reason it's called the Valley of Death is for two primary reasons. One, you have a lot of steep terrain surrounding you to the north and to the south the entire time that you're moving. So you're very subject and a target of any avalanches that slide in that area. And you have those really big slopes, so you get a lot of momentum as they come down off that high ground. It's also called the Valley of Death because it's very significantly crevassed terrain. It's complex glacial crevassed terrain. So this is, for a long time, been the common trade route that a lot of people use to get to the Cassine Ridge. But talking some of those terrain considerations, the hazards above, it's one that a lot of people try to avoid, especially if you are Colin Haley or Chantal Astorga, who are going solo for that route. So for Chantal Astorga, and what's become the more common way to access the Cassine Ridge, a lot of people take the West Buttress route. The West Buttress route is the standard route for Denali. Notice through here, you do have some steep terrain above you, but due to this ridge line, just to the north where it says Mount Caps and Hilton the Pass, that terrain is a lot smaller terrain than you have over the North Fork. As you continue to move, you do get some bigger terrain above you, but you do get some bigger terrain, but notice that you're sitting on high ground here. The way I know that this is high ground is that my contour lines form arrows. Those arrows always point downhill if it is high ground. Now, if you look here through the center, the contour lines point uphill. That means it is low ground. The only spot as you do this movement where you're exposed to significant avalanche danger is right here around Windy Corner. So as long as you have good avalanche conditions, then the risk is mitigated, but you also are exposing you to a lot less overhead hazard in the form of avalanches by coming this route compared to the North Fork. Now, the other consideration is we have our altitude, which is another hazard in the case of Denali. So a lot of people will come up to 14 camp to pre-acclimate before they go to the Cassine Ridge. They'll also set up a pretty bougie, pretty nice base camp at that location. Now from here, they can move up to some of the higher points on Denali to continue their acclimation before they choose to go to the Cassine. From that point, what a lot of people will do is they'll move from 14 camp up to this area indicated by my red line, and then they'll move down the Seattle ramp. Now, this area is pretty heavily has a lot of potential snow hazards, but the thing that it does for you this route does for you is it means you're moving downhill the whole time. So one, the amount of time you spend in that crevassed or complex terrain is less, and you also have a lot less overhead hazard as you move down due to the way that those contour lines the terrain around you is shaped. So this has become a fairly common approach for the Cassine Ridge because it mitigates risk by improved altitude acclimation and having to move not quite as far to get to the base of the Cassine once you've acclimated. And then two, you mitigate the overhead hazard from moving through that North Fork on the standard Cassini Ridge approach. So that's the route that Chantal Astorga used when she did her 14-hour solo of the Cassini Ridge. Now, the final route that Colin Haley used during his solo of the Cassini Ridge, which he chose this route because it decreases crevasse hazard and made it so that he could still get to the Cassini Ridge with fairly little elevation gain, is he chose to go through the East Fork of the Kahiltna, which generally follows this line. Notice, one, that this valley, for the most part, is quite a bit wider. And two, it is known for being quite a bit less crevassed than the North Fork of the Kahiltna Glacier. Okay, so the route that I just drew is the route that Colin Haley used for his approach to the Cassini when he was doing it solo. The other consideration that he used for that, because he wasn't moving in a rope team, was the time of day. This also applies to anybody that's intending to move in glacial terrain in a rope team. So the time of day matters because as the temperature warms up, the snow bridges that you cross between the different points on the glacier and over crevasses warm up. So they get warmer, as that snow gets warmer, you're a lot more likely to punch through. So for his solo, he went, well, it was still fairly cold and in an area that had a lot less crevasse hazard. He said that was his upper limit for solo travel in crevasse terrain. And Chantal Astorga, in an interview, said that her limit is a lot lower than Colin Haley's. So that's why when she soloed, she chose to go through significantly less crevassed terrain, moving from the Seattle ramp that I drew up here earlier. So that's how I go through the planning process. It involves some research to look at those terrain features and identifying where the camps are. But what we are going to do now is we're going to move into our breakout rooms by group. And what we're going to do once we get into those breakout rooms, I'm going to pull it up on the screen for y'all. Okay, so what we're going to do once we get into the breakout rooms is y'all are going to identify a objective that you have in your area. And then you're going to plan 2 routes minimum for it. So you're going to have a primary route and an alternate route. Right now we have 19 minutes until we hit the end of the class. So I'm going to give you all 10 minutes to plan with your group in the breakout rooms to identify your primary and alternate route using these considerations. If you want to refer back to the slide deck, it is included in this the Linktree link that was put in the chat, and I'll put it in there one more time for anybody that has shown up late to this class. At this point, what questions do we have about the PE before I put you into breakout rooms? All right, Bethan, can you go ahead and put, nothing heard, so Bethan, can you go ahead and put the crew into breakout rooms for me, please?